The dusty road to redemption. Colorado stretched before Faith Campbell like her uncertain future, endless and intimidating. At 5 months pregnant, she clutched her shawl tighter around her swollen belly, as if to shield both herself and her unborn child from the curious glances and whispered judgments of passers-by. Summer 1878 was proving to be unforgiving in both its scorching heat and the weight of circumstance that had brought her to this desperate place. Faith had never imagined she would end up here a widow at 23, carrying a child that would never know its father. The memory of her husband Thomas's death still haunted her. The mine collapse had taken him and 15 other men just 3 months after their wedding day, leaving her alone and with child in a world that showed little mercy to women in her position. The stagecoach had dropped her at the edge of town with nothing but a small trunk of belongings and the address of her late husband's cousin, who had reluctantly agreed to take her in until she could find work. Faith had written ahead, explaining her predicament, but had received only a terse reply offering temporary shelter, nothing more. As she made her way down the main street of Redemption, Faith kept her eyes fixed on the dusty path beneath her worn boots. The sound of laughter spilling from the saloon made her quicken her pace. Men lounged on the porch of the general store, their conversation halting as she passed. She could feel their stares burning into her back, imagining their thoughts about the young, pregnant woman traveling alone. "Madam, you look like you could use some assistance." The deep voice startled her, causing Faith to stumble slightly. She kept her face down, her honey-colored hair falling forward to shield her features. "I can manage," she mumbled, clutching her trunk handle tighter, though her arms ached from carrying it. "I insist." The voice was closer now, and a pair of worn leather boots entered her downcast field of vision. "This town may not look like much, but we still hold to certain courtesies." Faith hesitated, then risked a glance upward. The man standing before her was tall, his broad shoulders blocking the harsh afternoon sun. He wore simple clothes, a faded blue shirt, worn denim pants, and a weathered leather vest. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could make out a strong jaw, tanned from long days outdoors, and eyes that regarded her with neither pity nor judgment. "Clayton Wells," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Most folks just call me Clay." When Faith didn't immediately respond, he continued, "New arrivals tend to stand out in a town this size." "Where are you headed?" Faith swallowed hard. "The home of Jeremiah Campbell. I'm told it's near the edge of town, past the blacksmiths." Something flickered across Clay's face, recognition, perhaps, but his expression remained neutral. "I know the place. It's a fair distance. Allow me to carry your trunk." Before Faith could protest, he had taken the handle from her grasp, lifting the trunk with ease. "I'll walk with you if that's all right." Faith nodded silently, grateful despite her reservations. They walked in silence for several moments, Faith keeping her distance and her gaze downward. "It's not my place to pry," Clay said finally, "but you should know that Jeremiah Campbell left town nearly a month ago, sold his place to pay some debts and headed west." Faith stopped abruptly, her hand flying to her stomach in a protective gesture. "That can't be. He wrote to me. He said I could stay until—" Her voice trailed off as the implications sank in. She had nowhere to go. Clay set the trunk down gently and turned to face her. Faith felt the heat of shame rise in her cheeks as tears threatened to spill. She angled her face downward again, unable to meet his eyes. "Mrs.?" Clay prompted softly. "Campbell," Faith whispered. "Faith Campbell, Thomas's widow." Understanding dawned on Clay's face. "Thomas Campbell from the Silver Creek mine," Faith nodded, still looking at the ground. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Campbell. Thomas was a good man." We worked the same claim for a spell. Faith could bear it no longer. The exhaustion of travel, the shock of learning she had no refuge, and the weight of her shame overwhelmed her. A tear slipped down her cheek, then another, and she turned her face away completely. Then she felt the gentle pressure of calloused fingers beneath her chin, lifting her face upward. Clay's touch was tender, his eyes kind as they met hers. "There's no shame in grief, Mrs. Campbell," he said softly, "and there's certainly no shame in bringing new life into this world." For the first time in months, Faith felt something other than despair. It was a small ember of hope, fragile but present. "I have a proposition for you," Clay said, removing his hand from her chin but maintaining his gentle gaze. "Mrs. Holbrook runs a boarding house just off the main street. She's a widow herself, good-hearted and always in need of help with the cooking and cleaning. I believe she might have a room available in exchange for work, at least until you can sort things out." Faith hesitated. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." Clay's expression was thoughtful. "I knew your husband. That's enough for me. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "in these parts we look out for our own. That includes newcomers who might become our own given time." Against her better judgment, Faith felt a warmth in her chest at his words. It had been so long since anyone had shown her kindness without expectation. "Thank you, Mr. Wells," she said quietly. "Clay," he corrected gently. "Just Clay." He picked up her trunk again, and they resumed their walk, this time with Faith holding her head a little higher. Mrs. Holbrook proved to be exactly as Clay had described, a robust woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense manner and kind eyes. She took one look at Faith, then at Clay standing respectfully behind her, and nodded. "Any friend of Clay Wells is welcome under my roof," she declared. "I've got a small room at the back. It's not much, but it's clean and private. I can work," Faith assured her quickly. "I'm a good cook and I can sew and clean." Mrs. Holbrook's gaze softened as it fell to Faith's rounded belly. "How far along are you, child?" "5 months, madam." The older woman nodded. "Well, you can help in the kitchen and with the mending until it becomes too much. After that, we'll sort something out." She gave Clay a significant look. "You'll see to it that she gets settled." Clay touched his hat. "Yes, madam," as Mrs. Holbrook bustled away to prepare the room. Faith turned to Clay. "I don't know how to thank you." "There's no need," he replied. "But if you're inclined to offer thanks, perhaps you might join me for supper sometime once you're settled. Mrs. Holbrook gives her help one evening off a week." Faith felt a flutter of something unfamiliar, not fear or grief or worry, but something lighter. "I'd like that," she said softly. Clay's smile reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. "Then it's settled. Welcome to redemption, Mrs. Campbell." The following weeks passed in a blur of new routines for Faith. Mrs. Holbrook's boarding house housed 6 permanent residents, 2 elderly sisters, a schoolteacher, a clerk from the mercantile, a young man who worked at the livery, and a traveling salesman who stayed 3 weeks out of every month. The work was steady but not overwhelming, and Mrs. Holbrook was mindful of Faith's condition, insisting she rest when needed. True to his word, Clay came by the boarding house every few days, sometimes just to tip his hat to Faith as she swept the porch, other times to sit for a cup of coffee in the kitchen. Faith learned he had a small ranch outside of town, nothing grand, but enough to support himself comfortably, raising cattle and horses. "It was my pa's place," he explained one evening as they sat on the boarding house porch. "He came out here from Kentucky after the war, looking for a fresh start. Built it all himself, taught me everything I know about ranching." Faith found herself drawn to his quiet strength and unpretentious manner. Unlike many men she had encountered since Thomas's death, Clay looked her in the eye when they spoke, treated her with respect, and never made her feel like an object of pity. On her day off, Clay took her for a gentle ride in his wagon to see his ranch. It was a modest spread with a sturdy two-bedroom cabin, a barn, and several outbuildings. A small creek ran through the property, lined with cottonwood trees that provided welcome shade. "It's beautiful," Faith said sincerely as Clay helped her down from the wagon. "It's not much compared to some of the bigger spreads, but it's mine, free and clear," he replied. There was pride in his voice, but no boasting. They walked slowly around the property, Clay pointing out improvements he had made and changes he planned. Faith found herself imagining what it would be like to live in such a peaceful place, away from the whispers and stares of town. As if reading her thoughts, Clay said quietly, "I've been thinking, Faith, if you'd permit me to speak plainly, what will you do when your time comes?" Faith's hand instinctively went to her belly, now prominently rounded at 6 months. "Mrs. Holbrook says I can stay on. The room is small, but she thinks we can manage with a cradle for a while." Clay nodded thoughtfully. "And after, raising a child alone while working full-time won't be easy." Faith lifted her chin slightly. "I'll manage, I have to." Clay's expression softened. "I have no doubt of your strength, Faith, but sometimes accepting help isn't a weakness." Before Faith could respond, a distant rumble of thunder interrupted them. Clay glanced at the darkening sky. "Storm's coming. We should head back." The return journey was hurried, with Clay urging the horses to a faster pace as the wind picked up. They were still a mile from town when the rain began, fat drops quickly turning into a downpour. Clay pulled the wagon beneath the shelter of a large oak tree and jumped down to help Faith. "We'll wait it out here," he shouted over the rain. "There's a tarp in the back." Faith huddled close to Clay as he wrapped the tarp around them both. The sudden proximity made her heart beat faster. It had been so long since she had been this close to anyone. Thomas had been gone nearly 6 months now, and before that, their time together had been brief. Their marriage cut short before it had truly begun. Clay must have sensed her tension. "Are you all right?" he asked, his breath warm against her hair. Faith nodded, unable to find her voice. The baby chose that moment to kick vigorously, making her gasp. Clay pulled back slightly. "What is it? Are you in pain?" Faith couldn't help but laugh. No, the baby is kicking. Here." Without thinking, she took his hand and placed it on the side of her belly where the movement was strongest. Clay went very still, his eyes widening as he felt the distinct press of a tiny foot or hand against his palm. "That's remarkable," he breathed. For a moment they stayed like that, connected by the miracle of new life beneath their hands. Then, as if suddenly aware of the intimacy of the gesture, Faith began to withdraw her hand. Clay caught it gently in his own. "Faith," he said softly, "I know it may seem too soon, and I would never presume to replace Thomas in your heart, but I've grown very fond of you these past weeks." Faith's breath caught. "Clay, you don't need to say anything now," he assured her quickly. "I just wanted you to know that when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I would consider it an honor to court you properly." Faith's eyes filled with tears, not of grief this time, but of a confused mixture of emotions: gratitude, fear, hope, and something else she wasn't quite ready to name. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "I never expected to feel, to consider." Clay squeezed her hand gently. "There's no rush. The rain's letting up. We should get you back before Mrs. Holbrook sends out a search party." The remainder of the journey passed in thoughtful silence. As Clay helped Faith down from the wagon in front of the boarding house, he held her hand a moment longer than necessary. "Think on what I said," he told her. "Whatever you decide, you have my word that my friendship and support are yours regardless." Faith watched him drive away, her mind whirling with conflicting thoughts. Could she open her heart again so soon? Would it dishonor Thomas's memory? And what of her child? Would it be fair to bring another man into its life? Inside, Mrs. Holbrook took one look at Faith's flushed face and, knowing, raised an eyebrow. "Had a good afternoon, did you?" Faith busied herself with removing her damp shawl. "The ranch is lovely, very peaceful. And its owner," Mrs. Holbrook pressed, her eyes twinkling. Faith couldn't hold back a small smile. "He's a kind man." "More than kind, I'd say," Mrs. Holbrook observed, helping Faith with her wet things. "Clayton Wells has been the most eligible bachelor in these parts for years. Half the unmarried women in the county have set their caps for him, but he's never shown interest in any of them. Not until you came along." Faith felt her cheeks grow warmer. "He's just being neighborly." Mrs. Holbrook snorted. "Neighborly is bringing soup when you're sick or helping fix a leaky roof. That man comes by here nearly every day just to see your face. That's not being neighborly, that's being smitten." Later that night, as Faith lay in her narrow bed, her hands resting on her swollen belly, she allowed herself to think about Clay's words. There was no denying the attraction she felt toward him. His steady presence had become a comfort she looked forward to each day. Thomas would want her to be happy, wouldn't he? He had been a practical man, kind but not given to romantic notions. They had married more out of mutual respect and compatibility than passionate love, though Faith had grown to love him deeply in their short time together. The baby kicked again, a reminder of the new life that would soon depend on her entirely. Faith made no decisions that night, but for the first time since receiving news of the mine collapse, she fell asleep with a sense of possibility rather than dread. The following weeks brought a change in Faith and Clay's relationship, subtle but significant. Clay continued his regular visits, but now there was an unspoken understanding between them. He brought small gifts, fresh berries he had picked, a jar of honey from a neighbor's hives, a tiny wooden horse he had carved himself. "For the baby," he explained, placing the carved horse in Faith's palm. "Boy or girl, every child should have something to spark their imagination." Faith ran her fingers over the smooth wood, noting the careful attention to detail. "You made this," Clay nodded, a hint of color touching his tan cheeks. "My pa taught me. Winter nights get long out at the ranch, whittling passes the time." Faith's smile was warm. "It's beautiful, Clay." "Thank you." As July turned to August, the heat became oppressive. Faith's pregnancy advanced into its 7th month, making her work at the boarding house increasingly difficult. Mrs. Holbrook insisted she take more frequent breaks, but Faith was determined to earn her keep. It was during one such hot afternoon, as Faith struggled to hang laundry in the backyard, that she first felt the troubling pain, a sharp, cramping sensation that made her double over, gasping. Mrs. Holbrook found her there, clutching the clothesline for support, her face pale with fear. "Inside now," the older woman commanded, supporting Faith with a strong arm. "This heat is no place for a woman in your condition." Once inside, Mrs. Holbrook sent the youngest boarder running for the doctor while she helped Faith to her room. "It's too early," Faith whispered, panic edging her voice. "The baby isn't due for another 2 months." Mrs. Holbrook's face was calm, though concern shone in her eyes. "Hush now. Let's not borrow trouble. Could be just the heat making your body protest. Doctor." Patterson arrived within the hour, his kind face serious as he examined Faith. "The good news," he said when he was finished, "is that this appears to be a false alarm. The baby isn't coming yet." Faith sagged with relief. "However," the doctor continued, "I'm concerned about your condition. Your blood pressure is elevated, and these pains could be a warning sign. I'm prescribing complete bed rest for at least a week, and after that, only the lightest of duties until the birth." Faith's distress must have shown on her face. "But I can't my arrangement with Mrs. Holbrook." "Don't you worry about that," Mrs. Holbrook interrupted firmly. "We'll manage." After the doctor left, Faith lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, tears of frustration and fear sliding silently down her temples. How would she support herself and her baby if she couldn't work? The small amount of money Thomas had left her was nearly gone, most of it spent on her journey to redemption. A soft knock at the door interrupted her troubled thoughts. "Faith," Clay's voice was hesitant. "Mrs. Holbrook said you might be up for a brief visitor." "Come in," Faith called, hastily wiping her tears. Clay entered, hat in hand, his face drawn with concern. "I came as soon as I heard. How are you feeling?" "Better now," Faith assured him, trying to smile. "The doctor says it was a false alarm." Clay pulled a chair up beside her bed and sat, his eyes studying her face. "But he's ordered bed rest," Faith nodded miserably. "For a week at least. I don't know what I'm going to do, Clay. I can't pay for my room if I can't work." Clay reached for her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "Faith, I've been thinking a lot these past weeks. What I'm about to propose might seem sudden or perhaps inappropriate given your condition, but I hope you'll hear me out." Faith's heart began to race. "What are you saying, Clay?" He took a deep breath. "I'm asking you to marry me, not out of pity or obligation," he added quickly, "but because I've grown to care for you deeply. I believe we could build a good life together, you, me, and your child." Faith stared at him, momentarily speechless. "Clay, the baby isn't yours." "People would talk, let them," Clay said firmly. "This town has plenty to gossip about without us. The baby would have my name, a home, a father who would love it as his own. And you," his voice softened, "you would have someone to stand beside you, to share your burdens and your joys." Faith's eyes filled with tears again. "But what about love? Don't you want to marry for love?" Clay's expression was tender as he squeezed her hand. "I believe love can grow where there's respect and caring. I already care for you more than I've cared for any woman. The rest will come in time if you're willing to try." Faith searched his face, looking for any sign of doubt or resignation. She found only sincerity and warmth. "You don't have to answer now," Clay assured her. "Take some time to think about it. But know that my offer stands, regardless of your decision." After he left, Faith lay awake long into the night, weighing her options. Could she make a life with Clay? The attraction was undeniable, and his kindness had been a beacon in her darkest time. But marriage was a lifelong commitment. Could she pledge herself to another man when her heart still ached for Thomas? And yet, the practical considerations were compelling. A home for her child, security for the future, and a partner in life who had already proven his steadfastness and character. By morning, Faith had made her decision. Clay returned the next day, bringing a bouquet of wildflowers that filled Faith's small room with color and fragrance. "I've been thinking about your proposal," Faith said after thanking him for the flowers. Clay sat beside her bed, his expression carefully neutral. "And?" Faith took a deep breath. "Before I give you my answer, I need you to understand something. I care for you, Clay, more than I thought possible after Thomas. But I can't promise that I love you, not yet, not in the way a wife should love her husband." Clay nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "I understand. But I believe I could love you in time," Faith continued. "You've shown me such kindness, such respect. If you're truly willing to accept me and my child, knowing that my heart is still healing, then yes, I will marry you." The smile that broke across Clay's face was like sunrise after a long night. "You've made me the happiest man in Colorado, Faith Campbell." He leaned forward, hesitating briefly before pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "We'll take things slowly. No need to rush the ceremony. You need to regain your strength first." But circumstances had other plans. The following morning, Mrs. Holbrook received a letter that changed everything. "It's from my sister in Denver," she explained to Faith, her expression troubled. "She's taken ill and needs me to come care for her." I'll have to close the boarding house for at least a month, maybe longer. Faith's hand went to her belly protectively. When must you leave? The day after tomorrow, Mrs. Holbrook replied. I've already sent word to the boarders. Most have made other arrangements but you. I understand, Faith said quietly. I'll find somewhere else. Mrs. Holbrook's eyes were kind. I hate to leave you in such a state, especially after the doctor's orders, if there was any other way. When Clay arrived later that day, Faith explained the situation. This settles it, he said decisively. We'll be married tomorrow before Mrs. Holbrook leaves. You can move to the ranch immediately. Faith's eyes widened. Tomorrow, but we haven't made any preparations. We don't need much, Clay assured her. Just the preacher and a witness or two. Unless, he added, suddenly uncertain, you'd prefer to wait for a proper ceremony. Faith thought of her options, finding new lodgings while on bed rest, with little money and a baby on the way, and shook her head. Tomorrow is perfect. The ceremony was simple but dignified. The preacher came to Mrs. Holbrook's parlor, and the boarding house residents served as witnesses. Faith wore her best dress, a pale blue cotton that strained slightly over her belly, and Mrs. Holbrook had fashioned a small bouquet of late summer flowers for her to hold. Clay stood tall and proud in a clean black suit, his usually tousled hair neatly combed. When he spoke his vows, his voice was clear and unwavering. Faith's own vows were spoken softly but with sincerity. I now pronounce you man and wife, the preacher declared. You may kiss your bride. Clay's kiss was gentle, almost reverent, a brief meeting of lips that held more promise than passion, but sent a flutter through Faith's heart nonetheless. That afternoon, Clay drove Faith to what was now their home. He had spent the previous day preparing for her arrival, cleaning, airing out the house, and making space in the bedroom for her things. I thought you might like this room for your own, at least for now, he said, showing her to the second bedroom. It was small but bright, with a window overlooking the creek. I can sleep in the main room until you're ready for other arrangements. Faith was touched by his consideration. Thank you, Clay, for everything. Their first week as husband and wife established a pattern of respectful distance and growing friendship. Clay was attentive but never presumptuous, taking care of the ranch work during the day and spending evenings with Faith, talking or simply sitting companionably as she sewed tiny garments for the baby. True to the doctor's orders, Faith rested, allowing her body to recover from the strain it had been under. The quiet of the ranch, the good food Clay prepared, and the absence of constant work soon had color returning to her cheeks. By the end of the week, Faith felt strong enough to insist on resuming some light duties. I can't let you do everything, she told Clay over breakfast. I may be with child, but I'm not helpless. Clay studied her thoughtfully. How about this? You can help with meals and such small tasks as you feel able to manage, but nothing that requires heavy lifting or standing for long periods. And you must promise to rest whenever you feel tired. Faith agreed readily, eager to contribute to their shared life. That day she baked bread for the first time in their home, filling the cabin with the comforting aroma of yeast and flour. When Clay came in from the fields, the look of pleasure on his face at the sight of fresh bread cooling on the table made Faith's heart swell with satisfaction. This reminds me of my mother, Clay said as they ate dinner that evening. She used to bake bread twice a week, rain or shine. Said a house didn't feel like a home without the smell of baking. Tell me more about your family, Faith encouraged, realizing how little she knew about her husband's past. Clay's expression softened with memory. My pa came west after fighting for the Union in the war. Met my mother in Kansas where she was teaching school. They married quickly, a whirlwind courtship, she always said. Came out here when the territory was still pretty wild. And they built all this. Faith gestured around them. Clay nodded. Started with a one-room cabin, added on as they could afford it. I was born right here in this house. Had an older sister, Caroline, but we lost her to scarlet fever when she was 10. I was 8 at the time. Faith reached across the table to touch his hand. I'm sorry, that must have been terribly hard. It was, Clay acknowledged. Especially for Ma, she was never quite the same afterward. When Pa died, I was 19, then she decided to go back east to live with her sister. She's in Philadelphia now. Do you ever think of visiting her? Clay's eyes met hers. I do. Perhaps someday we could go together. She'd like you, I think. The idea of a future together, of travel and family connections, sent a pleasant warmth through Faith. For the first time, she began to truly envision a life beyond the immediate concerns of her pregnancy and widowhood. As August gave way to September, Faith's belly grew rounder, and her bond with Clay deepened. Their evenings together became the highlight of both their days. Clay would read aloud from one of his books. He had a small but treasured collection, or Faith would share stories from her childhood in Missouri. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Faith felt the baby move vigorously. Without thinking, she took Clay's hand and placed it on her belly. "Feel that," she whispered. "I think we have a future horse rider in here." Clay's expression as he felt the baby's movements was one of pure wonder. "Amazing," he murmured. "Have you thought about names?" Faith hesitated. "I had considered Thomas for a boy, but now I'm not sure. It seems unfair to burden a child with that legacy. And for a girl, I've always loved Elizabeth." Clay nodded thoughtfully. "Both fine names. There's time yet to decide." They sat in comfortable silence as the light faded from the sky. Faith found herself studying Clay's profile in the gathering dusk, the strong line of his jaw, the slight curl of his hair at the nape of his neck. A new feeling stirred within her, different from the comfortable affection she had grown to feel for him. It was something warmer, more insistent. As if sensing her gaze, Clay turned to look at her. The tenderness in his eyes made Faith's breath catch. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to withdraw, Clay leaned toward her. This time when their lips met, it was more than the chaste kiss they had shared at their wedding. This was a true meeting and exploration, and Faith found herself responding with unexpected eagerness. When they finally parted, both were breathing a little faster. Clay rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that for quite some time," he admitted softly. Faith's laugh was breathless. "I'm glad you finally did." That night, for the first time, Faith invited Clay to share her room. "Just to sleep," she clarified, suddenly shy. "I'm not, that is, in my condition." Clay's smile was understanding. "Having you in my arms is more than enough, Faith." Lying beside him in the darkness, Faith felt a peace she had not known since before Thomas's death. Clay's steady breathing and the solid warmth of his body beside hers created a cocoon of safety. As she drifted toward sleep, Faith realized that what she felt for Clay had indeed grown into something very much like love, different from what she had felt for Thomas, but no less real. The following weeks brought a change in their relationship. The physical boundaries that had defined their early marriage gradually dissolved as Faith became more comfortable expressing her growing feelings for Clay. Though her advanced pregnancy limited the physical aspects of their relationship, the emotional intimacy between them flourished. October arrived with a crispness in the air and a sense of anticipation. Dr. Patterson, who came regularly to check on Faith, pronounced her in excellent health. "The baby has shifted into position," he informed them after one examination. "I'd expect the birth within the next 2 to 3 weeks." Clay, who had taken to hovering anxiously whenever the doctor visited, visibly relaxed at the news. "And Faith," She's well, Dr. Patterson smiled. Your wife is doing remarkably well, Mr. Wells. Whatever you're doing, keep it up. After the doctor left, Clay found Faith sitting by the window, her hands resting on her enormous belly. Not long now, he said, kneeling beside her chair. Faith smiled, though he caught a flicker of fear in her eyes. I'm nervous, she admitted. I've never done this before. Clay took her hands in his. You won't be alone. I've sent word to Mrs. Wallace she's midwifed most of the babies in these parts, and the doctor says he'll come as soon as we send for him. Faith squeezed his hands gratefully. I know, it's just, mothers sometimes don't survive childbirth. If anything happens to me, promise me you'll care for the baby. Clay's expression grew serious. Nothing is going to happen to you, Faith. But yes, I promise. That child is as much mine in my heart as if I had fathered it myself. Tears filled Faith's eyes at his words. I love you, Clay, she said, speaking the words aloud for the first time. I didn't expect to, didn't think it possible so soon after Thomas. But I do. Clay's face transformed with joy. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her with such tenderness that Faith felt tears spill onto her cheeks. I love you too, he whispered against her lips. More than I ever thought possible. The baby arrived 3 days later, in the pre-dawn hours of a crisp October morning. Faith's labor began just after midnight, the pains waking her from a sound sleep. Clay was instantly alert, helping her through the first contractions while sending their ranch hand, young Jimmy Peterson, to fetch both the doctor and Mrs. Wallace. Mrs. Wallace arrived first, her experienced hands and calm demeanor a balm to Faith's growing panic as the pains intensified. Dr. Patterson arrived an hour later, his medical bag in hand. You're doing beautifully, Mrs. Wells, he encouraged after examining her. The baby is positioned perfectly. Now we wait. The waiting proved to be the hardest part for Clay, banished from the bedroom by Mrs. Wallace, who insisted men were more hindrance than help at a birthing. He paced the main room of the cabin, flinching at every cry of pain from his wife. First babies often take their time, Dr. Patterson told him, his voice reassuringly calm. Your wife is young and healthy. There's no cause for alarm. The sun was just beginning to lighten the eastern sky when a new sound filled the cabin, the indignant wail of a newborn taking its first breath. Clay froze in his pacing, his heart pounding with anticipation. Mrs. Wallace appeared in the doorway, her lined face wreathed in smiles. Congratulations, Mr. Wells. You have a daughter, a beautiful, healthy little girl. Clay's legs nearly gave out beneath him. And Faith, tired but well, she's asking for you. Clay entered the bedroom to find Faith propped against pillows, her face flushed and damp with sweat but radiant with a joy he had never seen before. In her arms was a tiny bundle, wrapped in a soft blanket. Come meet your daughter, Faith said softly. Clay approached the bed cautiously, overwhelmed by the moment. Faith shifted the blanket to reveal a tiny face, scrunched and red with a dusting of dark hair on the perfect head. She's beautiful, he breathed, reaching out a tentative finger to touch the baby's cheek. Just like her mother. Faith smiled up at him. Would you like to hold her? With more fear than he had ever felt facing down rustlers or wild animals, Clay carefully took the tiny infant in his arms. She weighed almost nothing, this new life that had entered their world. As he cradled her, the baby's eyes opened dark blue, unfocused, but seeming to look right into his soul. Elizabeth, Faith said. Elizabeth Grace Wells, if you like it. Clay looked up, his eyes shining with unshed tears. It's perfect. She's perfect. In that moment, as he held his daughter, for that was how he already thought of her, Clay knew his life had changed irrevocably. The love he felt for this tiny being was instantaneous and overwhelming. matched only by the deepened love he felt for the remarkable woman who had brought her into the world. The following days were a blur of adjustment as Clay and Faith settled into parenthood. Elizabeth proved to be a good-natured baby, nursing well and sleeping for reasonable stretches. Faith recovered quickly from the birth, though she tired easily and was grateful for Clay's constant support. Word of the birth spread through Redemption. Visitors began arriving at the ranch, bringing gifts and well wishes. Mrs. Holbrook, back from Denver, was among the first, bringing a beautiful quilt she had made for the baby. "She has your eyes," she told Faith, cradling little Elizabeth, "but I see her father in her too." Faith glanced at Clay, who was watching them from across the room. Their eyes met in shared understanding. There would be no correction of Mrs. Holbrook's assumption. Elizabeth was Clay's daughter in every way that mattered. As autumn deepened toward winter, the little family grew more tightly knit. Clay proved to be a natural father, taking to parenthood with a tenderness that made Faith fall more deeply in love with him each day. He would walk the floor with Elizabeth when she was fussy, sing to her in a surprisingly sweet baritone, and watch with fascination as she began to focus her eyes and respond to their voices. By Christmas, Faith felt fully recovered from the birth. The ranch was decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons, and Clay had cut a small tree that stood in the corner of the main room, adorned with homemade ornaments and candles. On Christmas Eve, after they had put Elizabeth down for the night, Clay presented Faith with a small package. "It's not much," he said as she unwrapped it, "but I wanted you to have something special for our first Christmas." Inside the box was a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. Faith opened it to find a tiny portrait of Clay on one side. The other side was empty. "I thought we might get a likeness of Elizabeth made to go in the other side," Clay explained. "When we go into town next." Faith's eyes filled with happy tears. "It's beautiful, Clay, thank you." She reached beneath the tree for her gift to him, a new leather-bound journal tooled with his initials. "For your thoughts," she said as he unwrapped it, "or for Elizabeth when she's older, a record of our life together." Clay pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that had only grown in the months of their marriage. "I love you, Faith Wells," he whispered against her lips. "And I love you," she replied, "more than I ever thought possible." Later that night, as snow began to fall gently outside, Faith lay in Clay's arms, listening to the soft sounds of his breathing and the occasional sigh from Elizabeth in her cradle beside their bed. She thought of the journey that had brought her here, the grief, the fear, the shame she had felt arriving in Redemption less than a year ago. How different her life was now. She had a husband who loved her, a beautiful daughter, and a home filled with warmth and hope. The future stretched before them, full of promise. Faith closed her eyes, her heart full of gratitude. In Clay's gentle hands, she had found not just support in a moment of shame, but a love that had healed her broken heart and given her a new beginning. As she drifted toward sleep, Faith said a silent prayer of thanks for the twists of fate that had brought her to Redemption and to Clay Wells, the man who had truly redeemed her life. Spring arrived in a burst of wildflowers and new growth. Elizabeth, now 6 months old, was thriving, a cheerful baby with her mother's honey-colored hair and a smile that could melt the hardest heart. She had Clay wrapped around her tiny finger, and he delighted in her every new accomplishment. On a warm May afternoon, Clay surprised Faith by hitching up the wagon and announcing they were taking a family outing. "Where are we going?" Faith asked, settling Elizabeth on her lap. Clay's smile was mysterious. "You'll see." He drove them to a high meadow overlooking the valley, where he had prepared a picnic beneath the spreading branches of an old oak tree. As they ate and watched Elizabeth play on a blanket, batting at the dandelion puffs Clay blew for her amusement, Faith felt a contentment so complete it was almost overwhelming. "I have something to ask you," Clay said, taking her hand. "I know we didn't begin our marriage in the traditional way. Circumstances brought us together before love had a chance to grow." Faith squeezed his hand. "But it did grow. It's still growing." Clay nodded, his eyes warm. "That's just it, Faith. I want to make sure you know that what we have now, it's everything I've ever wanted. You and Elizabeth, you're my whole world." Faith felt tears prick her eyes. "As you are ours." "So I was thinking," Clay continued, reaching into his pocket, "that perhaps we might renew our vows. A proper ceremony this time with friends and family present. A celebration of the love we've found together." He opened his hand to reveal a simple gold band set with a small diamond. "I should have given you a proper ring from the start. Better late than never." Faith's tears spilled over as she held out her hand, allowing Clay to slide the ring onto her finger. "Yes," she whispered. "1,000 times yes." Clay gathered her into his arms, mindful of Elizabeth playing nearby, and kissed her with all the love in his heart. "I promise you, Faith Wells," he murmured against her lips, "that I will spend the rest of my life making you as happy as you've made me." Faith smiled up at him, her heart so full it felt it might burst. "You already have," she assured him. "From the moment you lifted my chin with your gentle hands, you've been saving me in ways you can't even imagine." As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, casting a golden glow over the meadow, the little family made their way home. Elizabeth fell asleep in Faith's arms, her small face peaceful in slumber. Faith looked over at Clay, his profile strong against the setting sun, and sent up a silent prayer of thanksgiving. Life had taken her on an unexpected journey, through grief and shame to a love more profound than she had ever dreamed possible. And as Clay reached across the wagon seat to take her hand, his touch as gentle and reassuring as it had been that first day in redemption, Faith knew with absolute certainty that their story was just beginning. The best chapters were yet to be written, in the life they would build together, Clay, Faith, Elizabeth, and whatever other children might bless their union in the years to come. The shame that had once bowed her head was gone, replaced by the quiet pride of a woman who knew herself to be deeply loved. And in that love, Faith had found her true redemption.